I'm fascinated by the country. I want at some point to go and see the different states. I've got a ways to go, but this is a chance to explore more of Mississippi. I've just driven through it in the past. Every trip we go on involves the search for something, even if we don't know what it is. Hello, I'm Nick Savides, and this is a story about my recent road trip to Mississippi, what I was searching for, and what I found along the way. I'm here in Virginia in a trail not far from where I grew up. I'm back in town visiting family for the holidays, and this trail and surrounding areas are the paths I've been running while trying to figure out what kind of video I want to share with you. To tell the whole story about where we're going, sometimes we need to circle back to where we came from. In this video, I'll tell you about some of the places I visited, what happened on the trip, but also some of the things that led up to the experience. I should tell you, right from the start, I was supposed to go on the trip with a friend, but that didn't work out. So for much of this video, it's going to be just me, although some notable people do come into the story a little later. As sometimes happens with road trips, there are winding roads and detours in this video. I'll tell you not just about the things I encountered, but also the books, the films, and other experiences that colored my outlook, that inspired this video. By way of introduction, let me read to you my journal entry that I wrote a few days before the trip. It's complicated, but I'm going on the road trip in search of truths greater than myself and all my shortcomings and insecurities. I don't always get things right, but I do strive to believe in something bigger and more transcendent than my day-to-day perceptions. And I've said a prayer or two that things could work out in a meaningful and affirming way. I'm going on this road trip in search of that, the encounter with the transcendent that can make it all seem okay, or at least that can put into perspective the experiences that I've had. After driving for a bit, I took a break to elaborate on some of my hopes for the trip. The films of Frank Capra have been a big inspiration to me. He's one of the reasons I studied film, and you see his appreciation for America in so many of his films, from It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Meet John Doe, and so on. The hope was that doing this trip, I get to learn a little bit more about the country. I get to find some clarity about what's next, find some inspiration. So that's the hope. We'll see how it goes. While driving to Jackson, Mississippi, I was listening to The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain and The Optimist's Daughter by Eudora Welty, whose house I would visit later that day. I've read a couple of books by Mark Twain, but it had been a while, and I wanted to reacquaint myself with his vision of America, which is humorous and idyllic at times, at least in Tom Sawyer. Even as he gently skewers the foibles of the era, it's a book that is mostly a celebration of small-town America. The Optimist's Daughter offers a different outlook. Before the road trip, I was unfamiliar with the work of Eudora Welty, but she's an esteemed Mississippi writer, born in Jackson, Mississippi, the first city I would be visiting. Her book, The Optimist's Daughter, even won the Pulitzer for fiction. And there's a Eudora Welty library not far from where I would be staying. So I figured the road trip was as good of a time as any to explore her work. In the book, Judge Clint McKelvey, the optimist referenced in the title, has an eye illness and dies shortly after the novel begins. As he's dying at the hospital, his young second wife throws a tantrum and admits to cheating on him. Lest we miss the symbolic significance of the optimist who has an eye illness and is dying, Eudora Welty treats us, or some might say inundates us, with recurring references to blindness and loss of sight. To demonstrate, allow me to do a dramatic reading. He's blind, nearly deaf in the bargain, Miss Martinell said proudly. Blind. As for her father, he apparently needed guidance in order to see the tragic sight. But the mother, blind in this house, in the next room, in her room. Sight, seeing, blinded by the light, revved up like a deuce, another runner in the night. Okay, that last part isn't in the book, but I mean, if Bruce Springsteen had written his song just 1 year earlier, it might have been. It might have been. Now, Eudora Welty is not the first writer to use blindness as a metaphor for a character's inability to see the truth. I'm more partial to the way Sophocles did it in Oedipus Rex, but then I'm Greek, so maybe I'm a little biased. Anyway, in The Optimist's Daughter, we learn that blindness might have larger societal implications. After all, we learn that the judge acquired his eye illness on, quote, George Washington's birthday. No wonder the book won the Pulitzer, right? To be fair, The Optimist's Daughter was published in 1972, the same year as the Watergate scandal and in the midst of the Vietnam War. Just a few years prior to that, JFK had been assassinated, followed shortly thereafter by Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy. So the country didn't have the same kind of optimism that it did when Mark Twain was writing. Admittedly, The Optimist's Daughter isn't quite Apocalypse Now, but it's certainly not a celebration of small-town America either. Lest I incur the wrath of Eudora Welty's ghost, I should mention that in spite of my dramatic reading, some might say over-dramatic reading, I still consider her to be an accomplished writer worth reading. On the one hand, there's the picturesque world of Mark Twain that could easily be represented by a postcard a la Winslow Homer or the like. On the other hand, there's the grittier aesthetic where the artist holds up a mirror to society. And if that mirror happens to be cracked and muddy and pointed at something unseemly, then all the better. I wrestled with which approach to use for this video. Should I just play the highlights and give recommendations for what to check out, or address some of the dissonance that came up as well? For now, I should mention that I like brochures. They're often well designed and include fun things to check out, like this one I picked up at a Mississippi rest area to prepare for my visit to Natchez. The cover's reference to the Blues Highway, also known as Highway 61, makes me think of the travel book Blue Highways by William Least Heat Moon. It's just a matter of switching the S from the first word to the second, so it's not a big associative leap, but it resonates with me even more than Jack Kerouac's On the Road because it seems more interested in getting to the truth of things, rather than just drifting through the country while trying to maintain a bohemian vibe. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying sometimes the search for truth is a little more interesting.